There's a particular kind of conversation that feels almost too delicate to hold, the kind where everyone in the room knows they're stepping into something deeply personal, something tied to identity and belief and the way a person makes sense of the world. And yet somehow it still begins casually, almost gently, as if it might stay light. And that's the feeling I keep returning to when I think about All in the Family and the way it handles religion, not as a grand, distant topic, but as something that lives right there in the living room, quietly shaping how people speak to each other, how they judge, how they forgive, how they argue. And there's one kind of episode, or really one recurring situation, that captures this in a way that feels almost disarmingly simple at first, where the conversation begins with something small, maybe a comment about going to church, or a remark about how someone chooses to practice their faith, or even just a passing reference to belief. And at first it doesn't feel like conflict. It feels like routine. But in that house, routine is never just routine. Archie hears it, and the way he responds carries that familiar confidence, that sense that his understanding of religion is the correct one, the natural one, the one that doesn't need to be questioned. And what's interesting is that his perspective isn't framed as deeply theological or reflective. It's more about tradition, about what he's always known, what feels right to him because it's familiar. And that's where the first layer of tension forms, not because he's trying to provoke anyone, but because his certainty leaves very little room for other interpretations. Mike, of course, responds, and his response isn't just about disagreement. It's about questioning the foundation of that certainty, asking why things are believed the way they are, whether those beliefs should be examined, challenged, rethought. And as he speaks, the tone of the room begins to shift, slowly at first, like the conversation is stretching into a space it wasn't originally meant to occupy. Gloria feels it almost immediately, because religion isn't just an abstract topic for her. It's tied to family, to upbringing, to memory, and her reaction carries that emotional weight, that sense that this conversation is touching something deeper than just ideas. And then there's who exists in a completely different relationship with faith, one that isn't about argument or certainty, but about feeling, about kindness, about a quiet belief that doesn't need to be defended in the same way. Her presence changes the tone of the conversation in subtle ways, not by resolving anything, but by reminding everyone that belief can look different, that it doesn't always have to be rigid or confrontational. What makes this kind of scene so compelling is that the conflict around religion doesn't explode into something dramatic. It unfolds gradually, through conversation, through small moments of disagreement, through the way each character reveals their perspective without fully intending to. The living room becomes the perfect setting for this, because it's intimate, contained. There's no distance, no escape. The conversation happens right there, in real time, with all its awkward pauses and overlapping reactions. And the humor that emerges from this isn't about mocking belief itself. It's about the tension between different ways of understanding it. The way Archie holds onto tradition, the way Mike challenges it, the way Gloria navigates between those perspectives, and the way softens everything with her quiet sincerity. You might laugh at Archie's certainty, at how firmly he believes in his version of things, at how he expresses that belief as if it's universal. And at the same time, you might feel that underlying discomfort, because what's being discussed isn't just funny, it's deeply personal. And that's part of what made All in the Family so groundbreaking, especially in the 1970s, because it didn't avoid topics like religion. It didn't treat them as off-limits. It brought them into everyday conversation, into the home, into a space where they could be explored in all their complexity. This was a time when American society was going through significant changes, not just politically and socially, but culturally, in the way people thought about identity, belief, authority, and the show reflected that by showing how those changes played out in real interactions. As the scene continues, you start to notice how the conversation doesn't move toward resolution. It doesn't build to a clear answer, instead it circles, it loops, it shifts in tone, because the issue itself isn't something that can be neatly resolved. Archie might repeat his perspective, reinforcing it, not out of stubbornness alone, but because it's so deeply tied to his sense of self. Mike might push harder, trying to break through that certainty, but his frustration starts to show, because he realizes that logic alone isn't enough to change belief. Gloria's reactions shift between agreement and discomfort, reflecting her position between those two worlds, and continues to offer that gentle presence that keeps the conversation from becoming too harsh. And through all of this, the humor remains not as a distraction, but as a way of engaging with the tension, of making it possible to sit with the discomfort without turning away. There's often a moment where the conversation reaches its peak, where the voices are a little louder, the emotions a little more visible, and then something shifts, not dramatically, not with a clear solution, but with a small change in tone. Maybe says something simple, something kind, something that reframes the moment just enough to soften it, and the room settles not completely, but enough to continue. And that's what makes it feel real, because belief doesn't change in a single conversation. It doesn't resolve neatly, it persists. It evolves slowly, if at all. Watching it now, you can still feel how relevant it is, because conversations about religion, about belief, about how those beliefs shape behavior and relationships, are still very much part of everyday life. The specifics may have changed, the context may be different, but the dynamic, the tension, the emotional weight, all of that remains. And that's why the show continues to resonate, because it doesn't offer easy answers. It doesn't tell you what to think, it shows you how people think, how they speak, how they navigate difference. As the living room settles back into its familiar rhythm, as the characters return to their routines, there's a sense that the conversation isn't over, that it's just paused, waiting to continue in another moment. And maybe that's the most honest thing the show does. It reflects the reality that these kinds of discussions don't end neatly. They continue, they resurface, they shape relationships over time. So when the scene fades, when the room grows quiet again, there's still something lingering, something unresolved, something that stays with you. And that's the kind of storytelling that doesn't fade, because it doesn't rely on resolution. It relies on recognition, on the quiet understanding that what you've just seen isn't confined to a single moment. It's part of something ongoing.